Ever heard of Bendy and the Ink Machine, old man? Yeah, me neither. The surprising hit of 2014's Five Nights at Freddy's has caused a monumental ripple effect for horror games. Whether or not that's for the better or worse though depends on who you ask. With its unique visuals and gameplay that isn't just you walking around a forest at nighttime searching for insert collectible here, while avoiding the wrath of insert spooky demon here, it really presented this untapped market, that being what we now dub as mascot horror. You've probably seen those words pop up more and more frequently over the past year or so, as more and more small developers try to dip their toes in drawing a child-friendly character and adding pointy teeth to him. And with Five Nights at Freddy's content now aiming for a much higher scope than this started with, there's never been more time between releases than now, leaving room for new faces to pop up, like Poppy Playtime, and the most infamous of course being Garten of Banban, the game everybody hates but can't stop giving attention to. No, I've never really been interested in any of these. I remember when I was like 12 and would see FNAF fan games, I was all like, why would anyone care about these rip-offs? But one that always piqued my attention was 2017's Bendy and the Ink Machine. Adopting a style very reminiscent of 1930s era animation, only with a dark, effed up version of the characters seen around that time, it blew up. Not nearly reaching the heights of Five Nights at Freddy's, but for sure got a huge fanbase in its own right, and put new studio kindly Beast into the spotlight. Although I don't think the studio is called that anymore for reasons I'll get into later. The most impressive part of all this too was that it wasn't even a full game, merely a single chapter of a bigger story. And with fans clamoring to find out what happened next, they began to release a total of 5 chapters for Bendy, quickly expanding into other forms of media as well. Animated shorts, books, a lot of toys, and Kindly Beast grew from a tiny indie studio of just a few friends to a full-fledged studio of around 50 employees that all got fired shortly after. Again, reasons. Bendy's popularity was capitalized on, but evidently not in the most efficient ways, as nowadays in 2023 only the most hardcore fans have stuck around. They released a new game last year, the long-awaited Bendy and the Dark Revival, with not even the YouTube Let's Players that got to voice in the game being willing to play it.
Bendy and the Dark Revival, I think that boat has kind of sailed. I just never got to it, and I don't really have a desire to do it.
What happened here? Well, it's a rather interesting story of promising beginnings, awful management and treatment of fans and employees, and the realization of your own limits. I myself have never played a single one of these things. I only ever watched a couple Let's Plays of the first chapter back in 2017 and saw nothing since. So today I thought it'd only be fitting to take a look through the entire Bendy and the Ink Machine series. So without further ado, here's the ultimate Bendy and the Ink Machine retrospective. Bendy and the Ink Machine came from the minds of the Meatly and Mike Mood, with the former wanting to create a world that looked like a sketchy cartoon, and upon making it realized that it came off kinda creepy, envisioning what kind of monster would inhabit it. As this guy. And after enlisting the programming assistance of the latter, the two put together the first chapter of Bendy in only 5 days. That's crazy! Making games must be easy! It was released on GameJolt for free, originally just being for fun, but with its viral success, they saw the opportunity to truly expand on this world, fully fleshing out the characters and lore into something more than initially presented, something deeper and more meaningful. Just kidding, that's $signs. With Chapter 2 coming out 2 months later for $6, and 3 more after that, all taking longer and longer to create, the team making it also growing more. However, despite the long development time and even releasing it for free, the 5th and final chapter seemed to disappoint fans everywhere. So, I'm curious to see what magic was there at first and how it apparently faded away as the game went on. Quick note, I'm playing the Steam version of this in the year 2023, with the team going back and updating older chapters as new ones would come out. Not everything is the exact same, at least as to when it first released. You know, there's nothing major, just an asset swap here or a bug fix there. Overall, it just looks nicer. And I figured given how the completed game still separates everything into chapters, I would cover it in the same way, so let's start with Chapter 1. The game opens rather ominously. You, the player, apparently called Henry, because we definitely needed another one of those, are being invited back to the old animation studio you used to work at 30 years ago by your old boss Joey Drew. Apparently he has something to show you. However, when you enter, things aren't the way you left it. The place looks abandoned. Nobody in sight. The only signs of life being the occasional projector showing an old cartoon or the giant film reel labeled Joey Drew Studios, still being turned on, slowly rotating. The other glaring presence being these puddles of ink everywhere, either on the floor or dripping from the ceiling. The first thing I thought when playing this game was how gorgeous it looked. I'm aware this is basically a remaster, with the initial release having much more primitive lighting, but still, merit where merit is due, it looks fantastic. The sketchy textures give it a very unique feel that you don't really get out of other 3D horror games, which usually try to go for as realistic a setting as possible, which either due to the developers' inexperience or the assets they're recycling, ends up coming off like a bad PS2 game.
Fuck you! Jesus Christ!
There's a reason why all those cartoony games from years ago still hold up, and Bendy has that exact same benefit. The wooden walls with the bright lights that make everything look all yellowed and old, and the clever use of harsh lighting in certain areas make the shadows really prominent, adding to that creepy old abandoned feeling. I really do think a major aspect of this game blowing up the way it did was a result of it just looking so good. And then you have Bendy himself. His mug is plastered all over this friggin' place. I never realized till I played it for myself, but for the longest time I just never even questioned what he, like was. But it quickly became quite obvious. He's a demon. Gotta say, don't love him or anything, but I definitely wouldn't say it's anywhere near as iconic or memorable as someone like Freddy. Hell, I'd argue Poppy Playtime has a stronger design. Wait, is his name Poppy? Oh, it's Huggy Wuggy. Well, that's lame. There are a small batch of other characters looming around this game too, but we'll get there when we get there, because Chapter 1 leaves things as bare bones as possible. The story right now is almost non-existent. After getting that letter and entering the studio, the most that happens is you pull a lever that reveals this big ink machine. I wonder if that's important. Once that's done and you soon after turn it on, you go to check out what it does and... that. And that's really it. Once you run to escape through the exit, you fall down to a deeper level of the studio. You go further and further down where you find an axe, that I assume will be used to greater effect in the next chapter. Well, not before giving you a seizure, of course. Yeah, they throw in a bunch of hints of something greater going on, like the text on the walls claiming the creator lied to us, or various tapes you can find throughout the location that gives you greater insight to the less than enthusiastic recordings that Joey Drew's employees would leave about him and his working conditions. And of course there's like, that guy too, I guess. Just what is you? But just because the story is nowhere to be found isn't to say it's not scary, quite the contrary actually. Because Bendy and the Ink Machine actually does have a bunch of great attributes I could list, in terms of being a solid horror experience. There is some super overt stuff that I don't really care for all that much. Like when you walk into a room and see this tall, goofy looking fella, but he's locked onto a stretcher with his rib cage being pulled out and blood splattered everywhere. I love ink. It's ink. 12 and up. All that stuff was sort of whatever to me. I much prefer the more subtle ways they managed to raise your anxiety. As if it wasn't bad enough already. Can I get a hashtag relatable in the chat? I think they mostly succeed in having that gradual build up, with events slowly escalating more and more until you get that final jump scare. Like the random wooden plank falling from the ceiling or all the bandy standees all over the place. When I say they plastered this fucker's mug everywhere, I mean everywhere. At first it was annoying, like, frick off you frickin' frick. Recently met up with Semi-Classic Sonic fan, I hope his influence isn't rubbing off on me. Go check out the top right corner for that fun video. I soon came to realize, however, that this was, intentionally or not, super effective at getting inside your head and questioning everything. Like, for example, when you go to initially turn the power to the ink machine on, when you leave to find the items that they want from you, there's suddenly a bandy standee that definitely wasn't there before. But because of that, now every single one of these guys had me questioning myself. Was that bandy always there, or did it just appear now? Most bad horror games have the issue of overfilling it with scare after scare, but Bandy is able to scare the player more from what they don't show, the anticipation of what might be around every corner. Like when you go to restore the ink pressure, right before entering the room, the same bandy standee appears from the corner before quickly disappearing. Then when you enter the room, a projector switches on playing an innocent looking bandy animation. You have to then walk past this to turn the pressure on, in which the entire room starts flooding with ink. So you start to sprint out of there, only to be met with a bandy standee around the corner that you might have missed the first time, startling you before you realize that nothing really all that scary happened. It was just all in your head. And that's without a doubt my favorite aspect of its visual horror. The sound also complements this very well. That little violin string... Great choice, way more fitting than your usual jump scare sound. You know the one, Really, the only thing to take me out of it was the pretty terrible voice acting. He says every single line like you can't tell if he's meant to come off cowardly or a cool action hero.
Let's see what you're hiding down there, old friend.
But that's not the worst of it. Like, this is all fine and dandy, but you know, game, what are you actually doing here? Well, you like walking simulators? Me neither. This is the most popular way to do every horror game now, and definitely one of my least favorites. Just because of how easy it is for folks to just have you mindlessly walking around for 20 minutes and calling that exciting gameplay. Really all you do here is walk around getting a couple items that are always glowing, so it's not like they're hidden very well, and that's literally all you do. In the short epilogue, you get an axe where they show you how it can chop wood, but I highly doubt anything truly riveting is going to come out of that. I just hope it gets a little more varied as we go on. But at only 15 or so minutes, Bendy manages not to overstay its welcome. But considering this only is chapter 1 of 5, it also being the shortest one by far, I'm not too optimistic this is going to be a game worth actually playing for yourself versus, I don't know, just watching Markiplier play it.
Hey! What the fuck?
Gotta say though, I'm feeling fairly positive about Bendy as a whole. Sure, the gameplay is a tad dull, but I'd rather that than it be monotonous or actually bad. And there's enough intrigue here with their story, visuals, and horror to have piqued my interest. Let's see how it expands from this point on. Chapter 2 picks up right where the last left off. You're exploring this underground area, which apparently somehow isn't like a hidden bunker or anything. No, this was for some reason just a 40-story tall animation studio. I imagine this is what the place where they make Cocomelon looks like. Very quickly, however, you realize you aren't exactly alone down here. You see a strange, shadowy figure walking around with a bandy mask and standee. But they have no time to stop for you, so it's time to get back to running around, pushing switches, and chopping wood. Oh boy. Much like the previous chapter, this one doesn't have a whole lot in terms of story, though I think it does a good job at expanding the most important aspect of any of these games, the lore. How else will we get out our 500 game theories without plot threads that go nowhere? You can once again find tapes that when you play them reveals the ramblings of a man named Sammy Lawrence. Some of them are relatively normal, talking about how annoyed he is that Joey has installed a new ink machine and how much of a nuance it's been, but there are some that indicate something has happened to him, talking about rituals and sacrifices and whatnot. What happened? Did the studio get rid of their coffee machine or something? That joke is for the Bendy fans out there. If you know, you know. I think Chapter 2 is on a similar level to Chapter 1 in my eyes. All the good parts carry over, but that also means all the bad elements too. And unfortunately, they introduce some more stuff that just isn't all that interesting to me. The gameplay is the exact same, just walking around, hitting switches, and pulling levers to get rid of the ink overflowing in certain areas. But they also introduce a couple other mechanics that are equally as boring. Like combat, just what this game needed. So sometimes there are these little ink blot guys who pop up, and so you have to look at them and left click on your mouse. I feel like the mechanics they present to you here aren't varied enough to create interesting, challenging scenarios, so most of the time you're either mashing the axe or doing the most basic puzzles in the world. Like when you have to face off against this slightly bigger ink block guy, and are only required to pull a lever to crush him with a box. So much of it just feels like meaningless filler, even though the full length of the chapter is only around 20 minutes. That's fine and all when you're playing each chapter one at a time, with months apart from every release, but when you're playing it as a complete package, like how anybody is playing it nowadays, it very much so highlights how little potential the gameplay here really has, without having to completely overhaul the mechanics. There are still a lot of great horror moments here that reminded me why I kept playing this game in the first place. Like when you go up to this projector room that oversees a bunch of bandies next to musical instruments, then when you go down there, you look up to see that exact same area to find out that they're all watching you. That's spooky, I love it. Then later on when you progress a bit, you go back through that area to see the humanoid figure with the bandy mask is now standing there, looming over you. I wish the game had more simple stuff like this, because it's way more effective at setting the mood over. We're knocked out by the fellow with the bandy mask, where he makes it clear that he's sacrificing you to the ink demon, this strange, inky creature that's been lurking around the studio, in the hopes of his sacrifice allowing him to be set free from this prison, this inky, dark abyss he calls a body. You really need a talented voice actor to make that line sound anything other than completely laughable. I don't think they succeed.
And then I will finally be freed from this prison, this inky, dark abyss I call a body.
Although he does say that we look familiar to him, which is interesting. Just who is Henry in relation to all these people? Why did Joey Drew send us here when he's nowhere in sight? And just how many trees died to build this goddamn studio? There's so much fucking wood. Sadly, Bandy doesn't take this offering kindly, presumably killing him off screen, which gives us just enough time to escape, with the ink demon close on our tail. This is where I died for the first time. Oh. less lame. This may seem minor to some, but I actually really dislike this death screen, because I don't even think it's meant to be a death. You're just consumed by the ink and have to escape it for the game to reset. I don't want to have to start back from the beginning or anything, but at least treat it like I'm dying. Like I'm meeting some untimely fate. Because I feel like it removes all the tension of having to escape Bendy, when I know that dying really has no consequence. It's like a Lego game, but at least there I lost currency. Anyways, after you run out and lock him through a door that he apparently is impervious to, you're met with...
Come out and show yourself.
Whoa! Who is that? This is Boris, I assume a sidekick to Bendy in his cartoons, and despite us supposedly having seen his dismembered corpse in Chapter 1, here he is, alive and well. What a cliffhanger. The perfect way to describe Chapter 2 of Bendy is that it's more of the same. Just as much good, but just as much bad as well. And unfortunately, the gameplay here is given much more spotlight compared to the slow, creepy horror build-up. Still though, I wouldn't say I'm disinterested or anything. Again, the lore I think has been set up pretty well. I really like the setup and payoff with the ritual stuff Sammy was talking about at the beginning, leaving you to wonder what turned him from a normal employee to a shadowy ink guy. But I guess we'll figure that out as we go on. I'm just worrying that we're starting to divert away from a horror game to an action that just so happens to have this creepy backdrop. Okay, Chapter 3 is where shit starts to get real. 1 and 2 took me like 20 minutes each to finish. This was like an hour and a half. It's definitely no coincidence this comes right after they started charging for future chapters. You wake up in a room with Boris. He's nice, apparently. Which is cool and all, makes it known that not everyone here is a mindless evil creature, but at the same time, having a partner does make things a little less intimidating, especially when they're a tall cartoon goofy knockoff. After walking around with him for a while, doing the exact same lever pulling you've been doing in every other chapter, and running away from what's honestly a pretty cool jump scare moment, you're introduced to the voice of a brand new character, Alice Angel. She asks you to come and meet her, where on the journey you learn a bit more about what's happening here. Turns out she's the one behind all the clones running around, her trying to use the ink to make herself beautiful, leaving the rest as soulless husks. She says that she'll allow you to leave the place if you do her some favors. Hope you like fetch quests. Apparently Alice Angel was nothing more than a one-off character that appeared on a poster in the second chapter, with the fans immediately gravitating towards her, and so the creators just decided they would devote the entire third chapter to her. Kinda concerning that they're just doing this stuff as they go along, considering the only thing keeping me invested here is the story, but alas. I'm not a fan of how much we hear and see of Alice during this chapter. Very soon in, we see her in another room experimenting on somebody, while she gives you exposition, and you hear her talking to you pretty much throughout the entirety of the rest of the chapter, which without a doubt destroys any kind of tension or spookiness her character could have had. It's that reason why so many horror movies seldom show you the threat. The more you look at or see it, the more your mind gets used to them, slowly making the scare factor less prominent in your mind. But at this point in the game, I'm not even sure if I'm meant to be finding this scary. Any subtlety the first two chapters had is almost completely removed by now. And while I'm sure some people like that as there is indeed more going on, but for me, all that really leaves us with here is the gameplay, which sucks. Not even the graphics are keeping me all that enticed anymore. The novelty of it wears off after a while when you realize you're walking through the exact same room aesthetics over and over again. It looks good, sure, but some variety would be nice at this point. The only real difference between Chapter 1 and here are the more mechanical surroundings, but even that gets tiring at a certain point. I'm not saying I want it to be drastically different like a fucking Bendy and Ink Machine beach setting or anything, but again, the novelty has started wearing thin. When you get down to it, it's only really mundane fetch quests. Like the stuff you do for Alice Angel is just 4 different missions that consist of her saying, "Take the elevator to get thing and bring it back to me, in which I will give you 5 new things to collect and bring back, in which I will..." They keep giving you the illusion of variety by giving you different weapons to use, like a plunger or a syringe, but you're doing the same thing with each of them. The only real thing worth noting is that if you change one of the ink blobs earlier in the level and get to the end of her fetch quest without dying, you're given a fucking Tommy gun which allows you to kill one of the later antagonists. Oh yeah, they started to like doing that too. Stealth missions. The other most basic thing to focus your game around, except the AI sucks so they're always getting confused and lost, leaving me to wonder what the point even was. I don't mind stealth missions as a whole, but with Bendy there's no real challenge to it. It requires no skill. Reminded me a lot of FNAF Security Breach where you just run around aimlessly, not caring if they find you, then if they do you just hide in a booth in which their dementia kicks in and immediately walks away. They try to introduce a new mechanic where sometimes the ink demon will come to kill you, especially when standing still too long, but like the projectionist, it's simply a matter of of rushing to a booth to hide in. Not that it matters, again, death has absolutely no consequence as far as I'm aware of. Not sure if it was always this way or not, but now when you die, you're brought back right where you left off. For example, if I'm doing the stealth mission and collect 4 out of the 5 collectibles, then get caught and killed by the projectionist, I'm just put back at the start of the maze, still with my 4 items intact. I just don't know what the point in even having deaths are when they mean literally nothing. The guy might as well just slap me in the wrist and point me in the right direction. It's just a game of trial and error. So you do all this stuff for Alice, and she offers to take you back up to the surface, where predictably so, she betrays you, with you waking up to see her taking away Boris. R.I.P. apparently. Yeah, she really likes him or something. I mean, he is the best character, just look at him. Looks like frickin' Toontown. Bendy Chapter 3 is the most ambitious yet, but sadly, also the worst. The first 2, like I said, were simple and short, but very effective at being fun little horror experiences. However, once you try to expand upon such a basic base from a gameplay perspective, without actually putting in the work to make it interesting, you're just left with, well, fetch quests. That's all I can really say about it. It's busy work. This is the middle of the story, however. It's really the part where everything starts to open up, although they sure have focused a lot more on Alice Angel than, you know, Bendy and or his ink machine. So I hope that 4 and 5 try to start concluding things in a natural way without continuing to bloat this thing further. Chapter 4 has a fairly simple objective: rescue Boris. First thing I noticed, we're thankfully no longer just dealing with the same aesthetics, with this one featuring a library, carnival, even a haunted house. Now we just have the issue with this art style in that a lot of the backgrounds have trouble truly standing apart, but either way, I appreciate the attempt. Although I would appreciate doing something in this game that isn't just pressing the E key. I know I'm harping on this a lot, but that's really all there is for a majority of this game. It's mindless. Oh boy, I can now press E to collect ink, press E to put it in the machine, and press E to turn said ink into an item, which I can use by pressing E. Slow down, Bendy, we wouldn't want to have too much fun now, would we? We learned through tapes that a lady named Susie had been given the opportunity to voice Alice Angel. She was promised the world, until Joey Drew unceremoniously fired her, replacing her with another voice actress named Allison, leaving her feeling resentful and bitter, trying to put the pieces together to make her beautiful in this inky form. There's a cool vent crawling moment too. That's something kinda new, I suppose. You're not doing anything there, but hey, I'll take it. Things fortunately pick up a little bit once you arrive at the carnival area, with you having to play little mini-games to open up the doors with the power. It's not amazing or anything, and the moments where you have to throw items to lure away enemies is just as uninteresting as the other stealth stuff, but it's something new. The main thing worth noting is we finally have the first boss fight of the game in this area, against this giant merry-go-round. You just have to press E to axe his bolts, but okay, I have no defense. The most interesting thing here is that the thing inside of him is clearly a human, so I do wonder what these enemies even are. I do like the continuation and payoff with the projectionist, however. Not only does he have a really cool design, but I love when he follows you and is just about to attack, when the ink demon shows up and kills him. Shows that he really is this all-powerful threat that'll take everything in your power to defeat. Just wish the animations were a little better. They punch like GTA characters. The haunted house area is also very neat looking, especially the house interior where you have a fight with, gasp, Boris! What have they done to you, buddy?
Boris! Oh no, what has she done to you?
Hey, dickhead, you wanna act like you care a little more? Much like the merry-go-round, it too unfortunately isn't the most exhilarating fight out there. Although I do like the idea of it bringing back the mechanic of using the ink to mold items to kill him, but the problem is, it's the exact same item each time. It's just a case of doing the same thing over and over while avoiding his easily telegraphed attacks, and then it's finished. Sort of an anticlimactic end to our sidekick, but whatever, I guess. There's no time for that, though, because we gotta defend ourselves again from the one and only Alice Angel. Oh no! Whoa. Wait, what the hell was that? Chapter 4 of Bendy is at the very least better than the last, but still suffers from the massive problem of not being fun. Again, for a 15-minute experience, this is fine and all, but these chapters are getting to be like an hour long, for me at least, and it just bores me after a while. The same fetch quests, the same enemies, same-ish backdrops, and the story just doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. They spent 2 chapters hyping up Alice as an antagonist, only to have her killed by a clone of herself. I really just can't see the appeal of this other than the lore, which doesn't even seem that interesting in the first place. Joey Drew was an asshole? Cool! How did they become these creatures? What happened to Joey? What does any of this have to do with Bendy the Ink Demon? I don't know, but I have to assume it's all paid off in the final part. I fucking hope. Hope you like cutscenes, because this chapter sure has a whole lot of them, especially for a game that once had such confidence in show don't tell. You can tell they really want to cram all this down your throat as much as possible. We learn that these people aren't like the other ink creatures. This isn't Boris, it's Tom. And this isn't Angel, it's Allison. They're different from Henry, apparently. They're completely made out of ink. Before they run away as the Ink Demon does not find their location, they give us this new device to use that allows us to see hidden messages on the wall. I don't know why they'd introduce this at the last minute, considering it's barely used and isn't mandatory to finish anything, but hey, they also put a bunch of hidden messages in Chapter 1 through 4 too, so I guess they expect you to replay the entire game again just to see lore messages I could look up on YouTube. I guess that's my very long-winded way of saying, no, the gameplay has not seen an improvement. There's this one part where you're in a boat just holding in the E key to go forward while a giant bendy hand follows you through the ink like a shark in water. And there's this part where endless waves of enemies come to attack you and it goes on for like 10 minutes. I genuinely thought I was doing something wrong. I get it's like a test of skill or whatever, except no. Again, you can't die. If you get killed by them, you just respawn in the exact same point in the fight where you left off. I just started standing still and waiting for the enemies to come to me at a certain point. I don't know how this was left in the game, seriously. I guess we learn a little about the financial struggles the company was facing, and Sammy even returns too, where you just hit him like 50 times in a really easy fight before he starts crying. What a payoff. They thankfully bring back the stealth missions, this time combining it with the collecting ink and turning into pipes part of the game, with the map being way too big for these crappy AIs to deal with. All the terrible gameplay mechanics are here for this final send-off. I sure do love trying to get to the other end of the map while avoiding enemies to get a piece of ink, then running back, and then doing it again, and again. But finally, you go into the ink machine and confront the Ink Demon, to show him the end. But not before our epic final boss. This is it. They've been hyping it up all game. Just what are we gonna do to this guy? He mindlessly runs into walls so you can turn on levers, and then you just lure him into smashing 4 ink containers. And then that's the end. I would give more of a reaction, but I'm honestly not surprised. I guess I can see why fans were so pissed about this. Notice how each of these chapter discussions got shorter and shorter? Yeah, that's for a reason. I had literally nothing to talk about other than just describing what happens. The game ends with us entering a house that in any other game would look boring as shit, but here is a wonderful change of pace. We're met with Joey Drew. Finally! There he is! Ugh. He tells us that, as his partner, we were always good at pushing him to do the right thing, but should have pushed him a little harder. Okay. We then walk through a door where we're met with the start of the game again. Okay. Fans were pissed. I think there was almost half a year between Chapter 4 and 5, and yeah, this definitely didn't seem worth the wait, especially considering it doesn't even have a definitive conclusion, just a vague idea that this is some cycle and that we're seeing the start of the game and not the end. But from what I can piece together, and by I mean MatPat, this is what I think happens in Bendy and the Ink Machine. So this guy, Joey Drew, creates a studio for his character Bendy, expanding his world with new characters, but also expanding his business. Although Joey didn't actually create Bendy, he was designed by his uncredited partner Henry. After Henry left the company to pursue starting a family, Joey started to go a bit crazy, experimenting with creating these strange ink creatures based off his characters, once the company's profits started going down. Using his brand new ink machine, he could also turn ink into other useful materials, such as gears, pipes, and tools. They just couldn't get them right, however. Sure, they vaguely looked like the characters, but something was missing. A soul. So, give him a soul. This left their first experiment, an ink version of Bendy, to start running wild across the studio. That's the Ink Demon. Got that? Okay, cool. Joey also just goes completely fucking off the walls, deciding to use his employees as well as to create his mascots. They have a soul, so they can just be turned into ink creatures. Perfect plan. This is what ended up creating Allison, Tom, and all these characters who used to be human, but don't remember what happened to them. The ones who don't become characters being known as Lost Ones. One of whom being Sammy Lawrence, who started praising the Ink Demon as a god to appease him. If you use that dumbass hidden message thing, you can see one of the labels on a coffin listing Susie, who, if you listen to the tapes like I mentioned earlier, was the voice actress for Alice Angel who was fired. She eventually was used to create the evil Alice you have to fight, which is why she's so obsessed with becoming beautiful. Allison being the voice actor who was brought in to replace her, being turned into Allison. The ending shows Joey saying that Henry should have pushed him further into doing the right thing, and the game clearly being in a cycle considering the ending, and also the hidden message thingy having a bunch of tally marks in the entrance, and the letter of Joey inviting you back to the studio after so long in the first place, along with all his other past employees. Yeah, it's heavily believed that you were always fucked. There is no winning because Henry lost long ago, forced to experience these events until the end of time. Ooh. And that's Bendy and the Ink Machine. Honestly, I didn't want to say it, but this game is pretty shit. Oh, I hate to say it because I really did love those first 2 chapters, but it just doesn't seem like this foundation was designed with all the ambitious stuff they wanted to try it in the later chapters. It stops being a horror game at a certain point and turns into a lame, simple action puzzle game, which never really seemed like its strong suit in the first place. Who knows why they did this? Maybe they wanted to encourage folks to play the game themselves instead of just watching someone on YouTube play it by making the gameplay appear more involved. Or maybe they genuinely just got ambitious and weren't able to do all they wanted, but either way, doesn't stop this from leaving a pretty poor taste in my mouth. Like, this is the game that took the world by storm for a year, where it's supposedly all about the lore, yet they don't even bother giving you a satisfying conclusion, and when you do try to piece it all together, it's as basic as, guy went crazy with greed and started turning people into ink demons. That's lame. None of that stopped the company's expansion, however. Kindly Beast were riding high off the success of Bendy, buying an entire studio and hiring employee after employee. They wanted to start branching out into other successful projects, while still offering support for Bendy. One of these new releases was a game called Showdown Bandit, and it also, sadly, is where the issues start popping up. According to developers, they made the game with a very unique style and gameplay mechanics. Hype was relatively big and people were intrigued at what was next for the studio. Last thing you'd want to be is a one-trick pony. That is, until the Meatly and Mike Mood saw what was going on. Apparently they were pretty bad at accepting other people's input, much preferring their own ideas and believing they could do better. And so a few weeks before Showdown Bandit was expected to release, they secretly scrapped just about everything. The original developers were never told about this until the game came out, being almost unrecognizable to the game that they had been working on. You know, you have to question what the point in even hiring developers are when you prefer doing everything yourself, but hey, as long as the game comes out good, then it would all be worth it, right? Well, I can't tell you. They took the game down off Steam forever a while back. I mean, I guess that says more than a review ever could, right? The game was not received nearly as well as Bendy, or sold as well for that matter, with the response from the Meatly and Mike being to fire almost 50 employees with little to no notice right before Christmas. Cool. Yeah, they've gotten in a lot of controversy since the release of Bendy. Some minor, like crying about Fortnite having rubber hose skins, saying they're ripping off Bendy, which is funny considering... and a lot more serious accusations, like claims of harassment, using fan art with little to no credit or compensation, using fan theories for the lore of Bendy without credit, and having the quote of, "Oh, it's good enough, our fans don't care," which is most definitely corroborated by the release of the console and mobile ports of Bendy, which features way more glitches than the Steam release, and have yet to be fixed after all these years. $25 well spent. This firing debacle was by far the worst, however. Really comes off like they got in over their heads, without considering that the success of these mascot horror games rarely last more than a couple years. But it's also pretty scummy to cry that you need to fire a large chunk of employees right before the holidays, or else your business wouldn't survive, while also going on Facebook to post pictures of your giant mansion and sports car. I don't want to focus on all this drama for too long, especially since there's this giant 4-hour video compiling it all with dates and evidence and whatnot. Really great video, you should go check it out, because we're going to focus on what's next for Bendy. We got some books, some short animations released, a whole lot of toys, a crappy mobile endless runner game. That's how you know there's passion. But people were clamoring for the next game, Bendy and the Dark Revival. Being announced in February of 2019, seemingly starring a new protagonist, updated graphics, new gameplay mechanics. By god, it looked like an actual game? I can't wait! Well, too bad, because you're gonna have to. Yeah, despite being announced early 2019, it got multiple delays, fans assuming at certain points that the project had been disbanded altogether. But we finally got a new release 1 year later in February of 2020. Let's just see where the franchise is headed. Well, this wasn't expected. Yeah, the anniversary of Bendy was coming up and the Dark Revival still wasn't ready, and so they decided to hold fans over with a smaller but hopefully still fun game to keep players invested in the universe, resulting in Boris and the Dark Survival. It is wildly considered to be the worst Bendy game and just not very good in its own right. But how's that possible? It has such positive Steam reviews! Yeah, I can't imagine why, but I seriously doubt any hardcore Bendy fan was sitting down playing this with a grin on their face. Instead of being a first-person POV, the gameplay involves a top-down view of Boris, in the little area he was hiding in when you met him in the original game. He's been trying to survive down here in whatever supplies he can find while trying to avoid the wrath of the Ink Demon, who's always on the lookout. And so each day he dons a hard hat and takes an elevator down to the main studio to look for supplies. That's really all there is to it in terms of the main story. Even though there's a few extra stuff you can do, like an Alice Angel ending where it's her chasing you while you collect hearts, as well as a whole lot of tips and bonus music stuff, but as you'll soon see, this game didn't really keep my attention for very long. The whole gimmick here is that the rooms are procedurally generated, meaning each time you take the elevator down, you'll be entering a unique room, where you're tasked with collecting 6 items scattered around the place. That's really it. Each time you succeed, it'll move on to the next day, but I'll be damned if I was gonna see it through to the end. Apparently it was even more bare bones at the initial launch. I was wondering why it said Symphony of Shadows on the title screen with the Wolf Trials and the Unleashed in the corner. But these were the names of free DLC updates the game received at different points. Although I'm not sure how drastically that changed things. From what I could tell, it just adds more variables to the randomly generated rooms and more places to explore in the hub world. But guess what? I don't give a shit. First of all, I will compliment the visuals. Much like the previous one, it's got a great style. Even if it is much more simplistic looking, it's clearly done so the player can properly see what's going on without much hindrance, so I understand why it's done. Still looks good. There's some minor stuff I noticed too, which I thought was neat, like when you're hiding in the box and the light flickers like a heartbeat. Doesn't make sense, but it's cool either way. Oh yeah, the boxes are back. If you thought this was actually going to be something new, then you are sorely mistaken. So you just take those stealth missions from the first Bendy game, arguably the least fun aspect of it, and move the camera to a top-down perspective and you have Boris in the Dark Survival. Except, the random floors make things 1,000,000% more bullshit. Like, because the items are also spawned at random, sometimes I'll get a game where like 3 of them appear at the beginning room, which seems like something that shouldn't be allowed to happen, also resulting in much more of the match just being aimlessly roaming around looking for that last one collectible. And once you do so, the Ink Demon will spawn automatically, meaning you have to sprint back to the elevator as fast as you can without being caught, or else you'll have to do the entire thing again. Only issue is this Bendy AI frickin' sucks. Another issue with the random levels is that sometimes I'll have him spawn for me right when I get to a dead end. It's also not as if you can plan your route accordingly through trial and error. So sometimes you'll just get good luck, and other times you'll get a guaranteed feel through no fault of your own. That's not to mention the whole stamina system, where you have to be sure to use your sprint sparingly, basically just saving it for when the Ink Demon shows up. Your base walk is so slow and makes the search a slog to get through. I often just find myself sprinting through the entire thing, and if I run out and die, then whatever, I'll just do it again. It only takes like 2 minutes generally to find all the collectibles given how small the maps are, so there's not much incentive to staying alive as long as possible. When you get back to the hub and leave off your supplies, you can explore the room to find these item counts, and I think these unlock extra endings, which mostly just consist of simple drawn cutscenes with text as far as I'm aware. I really didn't find myself clamoring to find out what happened, so I didn't bother with any of them. That may sound disappointing to some of you, but I swear to God, this was one of the most tedious and boring experiences I've had playing a game. It doesn't feel official. It looks like one of those free knockoff iPhone apps you'd see advertised on YouTube or some Roblox fan game. I guess I shouldn't be so harsh to it considering it was only $1, and it's not terrible, you know, it works. But I seriously don't know how they thought this would hold people over until their next big installment. I mean, how long did they have to play this until the next game came out? Oh, 2 years. Can't say I would have been returning to this each day in anticipation. There are these little mini-games you can do during matches too, mainly just consisting of pressing the A button at the right time. I got some dance blueprints from this, which just changes what little idle jig Boris does when you get to the record player in his house. And I'm pretty sure some of these were only added in certain updates, like the dead Boris clones you can search through, so I have to assume there's a random chance you get an item that the hub area calls for to see one of the hidden endings, which is cool and all, but I don't care. The best way I can describe Boris on the Dark Survival is that it's pretty much just a top-down version of Slender Man, and I can definitely see why so many fans were utterly disappointed by this. It really does just feel like Kindly Beast had a lack of quality control. Oh, well, around this point in time at least. Oh, sorry, did I say Kindly Beast? I mean Joey Drew Studios. Yeah, apparently in 2020 they shut down their website and social medias, with future Bendy releases having the title screen credit them as Joey Drew Studios. So I guess they just adopted the fictional company name as their official one from this point on. Which I'm sure isn't a result of controversy being one of the first autofills when typing in Kindly Beast to Google. It also sure helps to muddy the waters much more in terms of what's real and what isn't. When I first started looking into this with no knowledge of what went down, I got really confused when all these horrible horrible actions were attributed to what I assumed was a fake company, but whatever, I guess it's not important anymore. Boris and the Dark Survival just kinda came and went. Sadly, not even the Jacksepticeye cameo could save it. But who cares about that, because the new Bendy game just released. Last year's Bendy and the Dark Revival. 3 years is a long development time for what started as a small indie project that was created in 5 days, so I'm hopeful that our final Bendy game to look at will actually be a solid time. Also curious as to what that revival in the title means. Is it a sequel? A remake? A retelling? Let's find out! Given how drastic of a change this game appeared to be when compared to the first, I was prepared for a whole new take on the franchise, but was shocked to see that it actually provided us with a pretty solid expansion on this formula, while still paying respects to and tying up the loose ends of that original entry. I know I'm being positive, I wasn't expecting that either. I'm not too sure on whether or not fans were happy with this game, especially given the 3-year wait for what's on average a 6 to 7 hour adventure, but after experiencing all that I have for this video, Bendy and the Dark Revival was a breath of fresh air, even if it isn't perfect. Initially, I fucking hated where this game was going. It opens with us seeing an animator at a studio named Archgate Pictures. Strange. Seem to have abandoned the Joey Drew studio stuff. Weird given how they changed their whole studio name to reference it, but oh well. We see her animating while using definitely not 3D references, when things start to get kinda funny. The janitor Wilson asks for her help, taking her down to put the power back on by activating a similar looking contraption. The direct comparison to the first game was a neat callback, but really bothered me from a gameplay point of view, because you can start to see them adopt all these elements from AAA first person games, which I personally cannot stand. This is just me and my tastes, I'm aware, so this isn't exclusive to Bendy or anything, but I could just never get into these games in general. They're so slow and I have to listen and read. I love games I can play while listening to a YouTube video, you know? But I'm not giving Bendy negative points for that, I'm trying to go in with an open mind. But in the original game you find the thing, click it, go to the pedestal, click it, bada bing. But here there has to be this long, boring cutscene for picking it up and dropping it off and puts me to sleep. Sure, it's more realistic and immersive, but guess what? If the aspect ratio constantly changes to go into cutscene mode, then my immersion is already ruined. Once we help him, he reveals his true colors, forcing us into the ink where we look like a half-human, half-ink freak of nature, with Wilson calling us, promising that if we find him, he'll reveal why we were brought here. Even more so than the others, I really have to praise the visuals of the Dark Revival. Sure, the human models look a little screwy, but the locations are spectacular. It's not as bright as the other ones, but the different varieties of blacks and grays mixed with the yellows and oranges makes the place look as creepy and desolate as ever. The characters have also seen brand new redesigns, with Bendy being given this snazzy new bow tie and jacket which look pretty sharp, and the Ink Demon appearing much more feral like a monster, instead of a bad GTS skin. All around good changes, I'd say. There's so much more different areas to explore as well. It's no longer just boring studio and mechanical settings. We see resting rooms where they're given these little pod beds around the place. Not only an original idea, but also complements the idea of Joey Drew forcing his employees to be in the studio so much that they had to sleep there. There's also this giant cool mansion you can explore. The highlight by far is the giant train station and cityscape. Seeing an actual outside world with this art style is breathtaking. I'd love to see a whole game here, honestly. And near the end of the game when we're in Wilson's laboratory, there are splashes of color around the place, and by god, it really pops when contrasted against everything else. If anything here looks like it needed 3 years to design, it's definitely shown through the graphics. That's not to say there aren't other positive aspects too. For one, the story is thankfully much stronger here when compared to last time, in that they realized they actually need to pass stuff off instead of relying on the fans to do all of the theorizing for them. I'm gonna recap the story, but from my POV here. A couple small things might be incorrect, but it's what I picked up and pieced together. So, you ever notice how we seldom get straight up reboots or sequels anymore? More often than not, the new trend has become soft reboots, where the previous event still happened, but the story they're telling just so happens to share a lot of similarities with what happened in the past. I think this is what Bendy and the Dark Revival is. But it could also just be a whole new canon where a lot of the same shit from before also happened? Who knows? Probably someone who will let me know in the comments. Thanks. At least subscribe if you're gonna be down there. So once we get inside the studio, we're met by Alice, the same one called Allison in the last game. She gives you some exposition on the factory and how she can't help you, but to be careful of what's out there. Which is strange given the Ink Demon's defeat. Yeah, apparently Wilson is seen as some sort of hero in this place, as he was the one to slay the Ink Demon once and for all. Only issue is, he didn't. There's this part where we find a jail cell with a funny little bandy inside, and like, pretty obvious why we shouldn't be opening it, but oh well. I hit the mic. I thought this was such an obvious reveal that it was simply a red herring, but we later get the shocking information that, yes, we just released the ink demon. Turns out Wilson never killed it, just sealed it off in another location. I really love how much of the story here they just flat out tell you. Usually I'm pretty against tell don't show, especially in games all about storytelling, but dude, it is so nice to just sit back and have someone explain to you what's going on here. Case in point, Joey Drew. Yeah, so like, it's not really him, but it's like an Ink universe manifestation of him, and he tells you a lot of surprising developments. Most interesting to me was that he spoke of the real Joey as if they were an entirely separate person. Being aware of his anger and greed is a bad thing. It was really interesting. He tells us how Joey was mad at Henry for leaving, blaming him for their business's downfall, and so created an evil machine that allowed him to create a world where he could torture his own version of Henry forever. You get it yet? It's honestly really cool that they do this, and I don't even really like the series, but we enter the main room from the original Bendy, where he informs you all of this, implying that the first game didn't actually happen, or at least not to the real Henry, mainly a scenario made up by Joey out of spite. But one day, the impossible happened. He got a hot girlfriend. No, not really, but a lady who he knew named Allison gave him a new lease on life, and so he gave Henry his own Allison as well. So now Joey wanted a real family, and so had a daughter. Or, well, created a daughter is more accurate. And so he made a child out of ink. You! Dun dun dun! This would have been a much cooler reveal to me if I didn't read the FNAF books like 6 months ago and immediately saw the comparisons between this and Charlie from those, whose father was so stricken with guilt that he built a robot daughter. Whoops. We also get some backstory for Wilson, although I don't think it was very much needed. We find out through what else but tips that once Joey Drew Studios started facing their financial struggles, the company was sold to Archgate Pictures, with one Nathan Arch taking over. And as it turns out, Wilson is Nathan Arch's son, who was jealous that his dad focused so much on his work. Great, and glad everyone has father issues in this story. And because why not at this point bring everyone in? We even get to see from Henry, who I think is meant to be the Henry from the original Bendy game, not the real world Henry, with him talking about being the only person who was ever able to break the cycle, by showing the ink demon the end. And so Wilson sealed him away too, not wanting things to reset. They don't delve into it too much, but I really love the idea of a world stuck in a cycle, being forced to stay the same for longer than ever intended. Overall, the story here is just overt and I appreciate it so much for that. By the end, you see of the dad, name Alice Allison, glad that was sorted. And after a temporary period of fusing with the Ink Demon, and even getting to play as him for a bit, you fight back against it and realize you can move on from your past by destroying the Ink Demon for good. She can now look over as ruler of the world forever. Pretty neat. Say what you will, but I just liked how focused it was. Doesn't take too many unnecessary detours or bring up important questions that have no hints of an answer. And it's just complete. If they ever wanted to do more of Bendy, they can just finally move on from this one particular chapter. Which, speaking of, the game is still split into. Although I'm not going to cover it as such like last time, they really don't mean anything. I think they're just there for reference sake. Which the game is full of, by the way.
Why does this feel so familiar?
Do you get it? Do you get that joke? Some cool references to other stuff too. Like I noticed during Alice's riddle segment, all the animals listed are the main 4 animatronics from Five Nights at Freddy's. But just what did they do with the gameplay here? Was it vastly improved like everything else? Well, I wouldn't say vastly. Mostly it's just a bunch of stealth missions again and pulling levers. But at the very least, there's some variety to it all. For example, there are so many secondary characters here, the game is allowed to feel super fast-paced, despite the gameplay not seeing very many switch-ups, because you're always running into a new face who has their own personality and voice and thing they want you to do. It's just cool at times seeing them expand upon this world with new characters and what their roles are. The stealth also isn't even that bad here. They've introduced a few new mechanics that create slightly more strategy at times. For example, there's a health bar now, and so when you're walking around foes, you can sneak up on them and banish them, which insta-kills them and replenishes some health. You know, there's at least something else to consider. The combat itself, sadly though, hasn't been given much attention. You're still just hitting enemies mindlessly for minutes on end, and with the upgrades you can get, they put up no fight at all. Then there are the super annoying enemies where you think you can attack them, but apparently just can't. Like sometimes this little guy spawns out of nowhere, screams and jump scares you, and then just disappears again. I couldn't even catch on to what triggered that. And it still has that problem where death is meaningless. Look, even Markiplier agrees with me. That's how you know I'm right.
Good thing there are no consequences for that ever.
It doesn't just make everything pitifully easy, but it means it's so you, yourself, don't really feel any sort of satisfaction for having toughed it out and took on a challenging moment yourself. Stuff like that just makes any game feel so hollow, like nothing you're doing actually has any meaning, but I've bitched about that enough. I'm sorry, I'll stop. I do enjoy the few upgrades you can unlock throughout the journey, my favorite being the flow one that enables you to shoot forward super fast. They do some cool platforming stuff with it at times. Really, I wasn't expecting to say this, but I wish there was more of it. I know, strange, I didn't want to blow my brains out. There seems to actually be elements here which I could see being expanded upon, like introducing and using more different types of goals to achieve that aren't just pressing buttons and pulling levers. Like, I enjoyed the few number puzzles they present to you, and it does feel like they start rushing you towards the end. Like, I think a lot more could have been done with the keeper type enemies. I don't know, your build up to meeting Wilson again feels so long, and then by the time you do it, it feels as if the game is already over, but hey, me wanting to play more has to be a good thing, right? Again, I wasn't expecting to say it, but I actually liked a Bendy game, and it only took 6 years worth of releases. Bendy and the Ink Machine is a strange franchise to me. I was anticipating coming in and having the exact same experience as my FNAF video from a few years back, where I checked out the series at launch, dropped off quickly and started seeing it as cringy, especially because of the fan base, but came in immediately realizing why it was so beloved in the first place, but I really had to fight to find that. The first Bendy game is solid. I think it drops off after the second chapter and worked more as a concept than a full game for $20. Boris and the Dark Survival was a lame intermission to hold fans over, but I suppose it was worth it. And while not the best game ever or anything, Bendy and the Dark Revival was a short but pretty fun and interesting time overall, once I got past the incredibly slow start. I guess the only thing I feel to talk about were the books, which I swear to God I ordered on Amazon, but they kept canceling my fucking order. It was like 3 days straight of that, so I gave up. But I don't know, I could always revisit it like I did FNAF. Once this video hits 25,000 likes, guys, I'll start working the Bendy books video. Subscribe to that. Wink. But either way, while I wouldn't consider myself a fan of Bendy now or anything, I at the very least see the appeal of these characters in this world, and will be mildly curious at whatever installment they release next. Just bring back the coffee machine.